It's October the 16th, 2021. I want to get into some issues today, particularly the school issues where the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has issued an order to have the FBI look into the use of the Patriot Act for domestic terrorism against attacks on school board members or harassment of school board members. Afterwards, I want to get on to the current situation of the spending bills in Congress and later in the video. So if you're interested more in that, that'll be later on. To begin with, I hadn't really talked a whole lot about this. At the first thing, it's obviously an overreach. It's been highly criticized, at least in the conservative media. And I think it's probably pretty much killed the thing as an operative issue in terms of them actually doing what was threatened. In fact, in my opinion, this was a kind of what I'd call soft intimidation, meaning the idea probably wasn't to actually prosecute anybody under the Patriot Act for domestic terrorism, but it was simply to put out that idea that it could happen and therefore intimidate you and sort of silence people's speech and have them not show up at the school board meetings and stuff. I don't think that's worked so far because I think it's a fairly incredible threat. I mean, even one of the cases that was cited, which sort of led to this whole situation in the first place with the school board association that sort of initiated this effort, had the effect of basically bring out the fact that a couple of young girls were sexually assaulted, raped, and sodomized, at least in one case, in this Virginia school system there. And the father that was supposedly this really out of control guy was a person that was just trying to speak out on the issue of why he was upset and got hustled to the ground with the police like he was some kind of a rioter or something. And I think that's kind of come out now, and since the perpetrator, I guess, is being prosecuted, it's kind of backfired, I think, in a way, and also the fact that the son of the Attorney General is involved in promoting critical race theory courses to school districts kind of shows that he has sort of a kind of a conflict of interest in the matter. So I think the whole thing is kind of backfired, and I think the threat of that happening is pretty minimal. Now, on the other hand, if somebody actually does engage in an actual act of terrorism, I think we all know what those are, acts of violence or threats of violence. I think in that case, it's possible this thing would go active. But as far as people just attending school board meetings and speaking up, even if it gets a little unruly, I don't think any of those situations are going to lead to that, as long as somebody doesn't actually assault a school board member or something of that sort. I think that, in fact, I would seriously suggest that everybody show a proper demeanor at these things, because acting irrational is easy to be misinterpreted by the people that are against you. And again, people need to watch the exact language they use, avoid phrases like, we're going to make you pay, as opposed to say, we're going to vote you out of office, to school board members. I think that if you see that there's a big distinction there, and it prevents the effective use of this as a basis for a charge. Anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. I think it's good to see that a lot of people are speaking up. Before I've always said that, I think the trouble of referring to this exactly as critical race theory is a problem is that, in the elementary schools, and they're not really teaching, quote, the theory very much. I think they're just engaged largely in what I would call racist propaganda directed against white people. I mean, I think this is, all this claiming that the white people have privilege and all minority groups are oppressed and all that nonsense. This is a propaganda front that they're using, very divisive, and it's definitely not trying to promote harmony. I presume they're actually hoping to promote more actual, let's say, inappropriate reactions from white people, which they can then use as a mechanism to clamp down on people for political speech and so forth. In other words, I think they're trying to incite trouble rather than prevent it. And so, anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that. I thought I'd address the subject, which I kind of, with all the other things happening, I didn't quite get to. The other issue I wanted to kind of get into, as I promised earlier, is to get into the situation on what's happening in Congress. As I had said in previous videos, I thought that getting this debt limit thing and the temporary continuing resolution out of the way was a positive development, not a negative one. I think it's turning out that way. With the Republicans out of the way and no longer the target, the Democrats are now going at each other with increased intensity. With Bernie Sanders and Joe Manchin, two Democrat senators, lashing out at each other in public op-ed pieces. And so, I mean, it looks like positions are even beginning to harden now, which is kind of good. And the problem is there's kind of a difficulty of figuring out how to get this entire social program policy that they're trying to get through on the far left side through. Already, even the $3.5 trillion, it turns out, has a lot of these gimmicks in it. But the gimmick is basically you create a program that once it's started, it's hard to stop, and then you don't fund it for more than, let's say, 5 years in the budget, even though it's supposed to go on indefinitely. Okay, and so the result is that reduced it from around $5 trillion to $3.5 trillion, and then now they're thinking they can continue to push that even further lower, whereas Manchin is opposing specific programs completely. Now, add to that, and of course, since he's McColl's state, a lot of the Green New Deal stuff he's totally opposed to. And also, there are actual differences between Sinema and Manchin on specific subparts of their opposition. They both oppose a lot of the big tax increases, at least taking them as far as the House wanted to take them. And then you have the situation where, for instance, Sinema, being more of an environmentalist, probably pretty much favors more of the Green New Deal elements, whereas Manchin's completely opposed to those. Whereas apparently Sinema is opposed to some of the regulations they want to put on drug prices, whereas I think Manchin, coming more from a pro-union background, is probably not as opposed to that. So in other words, even the two people who are holding it up don't agree with each other, so it's not a matter of compromising with one position. They have to compromise with both their positions, and if they do that, they'll be ending up pushing it back further. And I think now Manchin's pushing back also, and specifically against some of these, artificial limits on the time period that would exist. He wants to eliminate whole programs. Now, how this ultimately works out, I don't know. There's still a discussion of something of a $1.5 to $2 trillion bill in the works, and apparently the leadership, Biden administration and the House are willing to accept something around $2 trillion, but I think the devil may be in the details, and it looks like maybe the details aren't getting worked out as good as as they were planning. I actually think that the Republicans getting out of the way is actually helping, because when you fight a given faction, the faction tends to unite against you. When you're no longer fighting that faction, the faction tends to break into its sub-factions and attack each other, which seems to be happening, even public op-ed pieces at this point. And the fact of the matter is, it would be interesting if there was actually one or more of those people were to actually leave the Democrat Party. Joe Manchin would be the best candidate for doing that, since he could do it easily and it would actually not affect his electability. It might even improve it if it needs to be improved in West Virginia. But the point is that Sinema is probably taking higher risks. On the other hand, her reelection isn't up until 2024, and things may change a lot by that time. Attitudes may be quite a bit different by that time, depending on what happens in the meantime, so to speak. I mean, Biden's popularity is continuing to fall somewhere in the low 40s now, at least according to Rasmussen, and depending on which day you're counting. Some polls have it lower, some have it higher. I tend to like Rasmussen as a more stable and kind of likely turnout-based poll, which I think gives you probably one of the better ongoing measures of what's happening. So, but again, as I've said previously, I'm not that extremely hopeful that the whole social program bill completely collapses. I would sure like for it to. But I think that that's the best strategy. And again, like I was saying, I think the Republicans, being too, in other words, I'd fully be willing to trade raising the debt limit for killing the whole appropriation bill, because if there was no debt limit at all and we didn't have appropriations, nothing would be spent. Or in other words, or if we didn't have additional appropriations, it wouldn't go up as fast. It's not the limit that really is important. It's the appropriations. It's the actual bill that they're trying to put in place. And that is the real danger. The limit itself is a kind of a crude mechanism to control spending, but if it ever comes up against the limit and it's not raised, then you get into these sequester battles where programs get artificially cut in ways by the administration, not by Congress, and how they're implemented. And essentially you're empowering the administration to make the decisions of what gets cut. And we experienced that during Obama, and I don't think that helped us out a lot in a lot of areas, So I would much prefer blocking appropriations, and I think, and so that's basically that's been my pitch all along. And it looks to me like the strategy that I've been laying out at least is bearing some fruit. I think it's still too early to know what the ultimate outcome will be. And I can concur with the critics out there. They'll say, yeah, but probably something will still get passed anyhow. We're not going to like, and that's kind of the nature of the beast when you lose the election. And so, but at any rate, I think all in all, a lot of the things that we're worried about seem to be not as threatening as they were. This week I understand that the Senate is going to bring up their Democrat voting bill again, and I guess a modified form. I'm not sure whether these are changes that Manchin was talking about, but still, it looks like there's no real incentive to end the filibuster yet. So as long as we can keep the filibuster in place, I think that will fail. And so that's out there. This commission is still working on what to do about the Supreme Court or whatever. And I understand there are divisions within it between those that want to add a bunch of judges and those that don't. But of course, it doesn't matter again too much unless the filibuster fails. And a lot of other bills that you might be worried about, a gun control bill, or the legalization of large numbers of illegal immigrations and giving them citizenship, and so on and so forth, aren't really a real problem unless the filibuster is removed. And so that's why I continue to focus on the filibuster as the main weapon to hold these Democrats back until hopefully the Republicans regain control of Congress in the next election, which is not guaranteed, but the current trends are sort of going in the direction that would seem to suggest that. One thing that kind of worries me a little bit still is the fact that all this bad news is hitting Biden and the Democrats right now, an entire year before the election. And of course, a year is a long time, as they say in politics. Well, at any rate, I'll wrap this up for now and try to keep everybody informed of the ongoing developments. You can follow me on social media. I do post fairly regularly on Twitter, to some degree, lesser degree, but I do post on Gab and Parler from time to time as well. So until next time.